Hey there! Welcome to the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad and the Chicago and Northwestern Railway in Wyoming. Today is November 3rd, 2024, and this is Layout Update number 60. It's been 5 years, folks. I'm Mark Pruitt, Train Master. October was an interesting month, to say the least. I did just a little bit of work on the layout, bought some stuff off eBay, held an operating session, and this was nearly the last update for this layout. Off we go! A neighbor came over early in the month and I showed him the layout. We stood there talking as I ran a train I had parked at Casper. I wasn't watching it closely, and suddenly I heard a crash from somewhere near Worland. The locomotive had hit some papers I forgot I had laying across the tracks and plunged onto the floor. The lead truck broke off, as did the pilot. Here it is when I set to work on it the next day. Fortunately, the mechanism wasn't damaged. I pulled the parts loco I have out of the box and swapped the broken lead truck for the one from the spare parts engine. Here the spare parts engine is towards the top of the picture, ready to have the lead truck removed. As you'll see in a minute or two, that parts loco came in very handy more than once this month. Let's talk about my eBay purchases for a couple of minutes. In late September, I bought this locomotive, BLI Mikado number 5500. It was advertised as like new and had supposedly been tested and ran fine. It arrived the afternoon of October 3rd, shortly after I posted my last video update. I unboxed and inspected it. It was very clean. Sorry I have to keep looking at this image. I need to remember to take more pictures as I'm doing things. Anyway, I put the loco on the track and tried it out. Sound worked flawlessly. I cracked the throttle and the mechanism completely jammed after the drivers turned about a quarter of a revolution. Tested my backside. I messaged the seller with a description of the problem and asked them to advise me on what to do. I very quickly heard back, and the seller ultimately offered me a $50 refund on the loco if I would keep it and try to make repairs myself rather than returning it. Since I had the parts loco available, the one I just stole the lead truck off of, I agreed. It turned out the problem was that the front drivers wouldn't stay in quarter. The right side driver turned easily on the axle. I've no idea how it got that way, but the fix was very easy. I spent about an hour removing the bad driver set and replacing it with the one from the parts loco. Problem pretty much fixed. There's still a bit of a bind somewhere in the mechanism though, so I have some more tuning to do. But it performed well enough to use during the operating session. Since I already have a Mikado numbered 5500, I renumbered this one to 5506. In late October, I ordered these AccuRail Colorado and Southern hoppers off eBay. They were produced as a special run 6-number set, and a 7th car with a duplicate number was included as well. These would be great in beat service. 3 days later, this is what I found when I opened the box. Obviously, they were the cars I ordered, but the seller had been careless in the packaging and the cars got damaged by banging against each other in transit. The loose couplers and trucks didn't bother me. Couplers will go back on easily, and I always replace the trucks anyway. The problem is that a lot of the stirrup steps are broken off. I was not happy. I left what I thought was appropriate feedback and sent a somewhat pointed message to the seller. He was a bit upset. We went back and forth a bit, then he, on his own, refunded about a quarter of the total cost of the cars. I revised my feedback because he had responded quickly and given me the refund. All that could have been avoided if he'd packed the cars a bit more carefully. And we're still not done with eBay. Also in late October, I ordered this BLI Blue Line Mikado. It arrived on Halloween. Unlike the previous 2 eBay purchases, this one met all my expectations. I dug out my SD9 diesel and reprogrammed it with the Mikado's cab number 5502. Then I put the decoder into the circuit board in the Mikado's tender. Unfortunately, the darn thing stuck up so far the tender shell wouldn't go back on. I decided the best thing to do was to reduce the height of the standoffs that hold the circuit board above the mounting plate. I sanded down the standoffs, then applied a bit of electrical tape to the top of the mounting plate to act as insurance against any components touching the plate and shorting. Then I reinstalled the circuit board. The new Mikado runs fine. Once I clean and relubricate the mechanism, it will be ready for revenue service. That's it for eBay this month, but I do have a bit more on locomotives. When Bill came down from Sheridan, he gave me, yes, I said gave, me another BLI Mikado. This was quite generous and totally unexpected. I already have a number 5508, so I'll be renumbering this one to 5272, an 02A that served in the Casper Division in the 30s and 40s. I'd probably renumber it as another 04 in the 5500 series, but I don't have enough number 5s left on my decal sheets. Now we come to the S2 Pacific, the LM Bloom brass model that I remotored and converted to DCC last December and January. It's performed reasonably well since it went into service on the layout, but Larry, one of my regular operators, ran it at the session October 22nd. He reported that it derailed several times. In summary, I have to clean and lubricate 5502, check and adjust the running gear on 5506, investigate what's making 2939 trip over its own feet, and do a thorough check on the new 5508, plus renumber it. Oh, and I almost forgot. The Doodlebug needs some work as well. Getting back to the layout itself, in the middle of the month I decided to do a bit more work on that old timber tunnel portal. It was time to remove the extra set of braces on the river side of the track. That was pretty easy. I trimmed off the excess parts using a razor saw, then used Hunterline weathering mixes to darken the newly cut edges of the timber and darken the entire portal in general. All in all, it came out pretty good. At the back of the tunnel in this shot, you can see the pink foam the mountain is built of. That's not generally visible. You have to shine a light directly into the tunnel mouth. As I mentioned earlier, I had an operating session coming up on October 22nd. I spent a couple of weeks preparing for that and doing small things around the layout to make it, hopefully, run smoother. One of those things was to revamp the jobs board. This is the old board as it was left after the last session. There wasn't quite enough room to list all the jobs. I completely cleaned off the board, then added chart pack tape to make the grid. Before it was just lines drawn with a marker. Here's the new board. The Wi-Fi info that was at the top of the old board was printed out, framed, and mounted next to the board. The board now has enough room for all the current trains, plus space for additional trains and specials at the bottom as operations grow. Then I turn to some final touches in staging. Unless you know exactly where to look for the occupancy detectors in the monitors, they're pretty hard to see. To make them more visible, I added Scotchlite reflective tape strips alongside the track next to the detectors. It helped, but the tape isn't nearly as obvious as I thought it would be. I'll try adding some bright pins along with the tape in the future. The week before the session was spent mostly in cleaning the train room, then printing out manifests and staging the trains. This would be the first session to utilize the now fully functional staging yard. We had 10 operators show up for the session on the 22nd, a record. The train room got pretty crowded. I was running around like a crazy man, like usual, so I didn't have time to take any pictures or video, again, like usual, so you're stuck with these before session shots of the layout. I was not overly pleased with the performance of the layout. We had an intermittent short that cropped up for a few minutes, the S2 kept jumping off the rails, and a couple of cars also derailed repeatedly. Clearly, I have some work to do before the next session, but folks said they had a good time, so it wasn't a total disaster. One thing came up just before the session while I was staging trains. I had the occupancy detectors on the staging yard turned on for over an hour, and suddenly they all shut down. Turns out the old train set power pack powering them just can't quite keep up with the demand those 18 detectors place on it. It takes a while, but the power pack heats up to the point the thermal protection cuts in and shuts the pack down. I'll be replacing it with a higher capacity power supply very shortly. The cameras saved the day for the operating session. After the rush of preparing for and hosting the operating session, I took a few days off from the layout. I didn't even go into the train room for a couple days. But then a few days ago I got busy again, finally getting back to working on Powell. Here I'm laying the ramp that leads from a siding back onto the main track. I'll get that section of track laid in the next couple of days, then press on. In the intro, I said this was almost the last update for this layout. Here's the story. In early October, we looked at a new house in Bar None, Wyoming, just a few miles north of Casper. The house seemed pretty nice, and the basement would provide a layout space almost 40% larger than the current train room. We made an offer, and after a bit of negotiation, we settled on a price. We had a deal, I thought. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, during the home inspection, we discovered that the electric service was too small at 150 amps. 200 amps has been the industry standard for decades. With 2 electric cars to charge, we need the standard service, and the builder wasn't willing to make the upgrade, so no deal. We're staying put, at least for now. Which brings us to the end for this month. I'm going to continue working on the Cody branch in November, plus try to get those damaged hoppers on the layout. I'll also start working on those engines that need some attention, though I probably won't finish all of them. I might also get back to Wind River Canyon rockwork. I'd like to make more progress there. Don't forget the Cronkite segment right after this. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next month. In the Cronkite segment last month, I talked about version 2 of the layout in 2003. Early 2004 saw continued work on the Northern Pacific portion of the layout, both the Seattle staging yard in the foreground and some early work in the Minneapolis yard in the far background. The narrow sheet of plywood with the bricks on it was where Laurel, the only visible part of all this, would go. By the middle of 2004, I had the tracks laid into Laurel and trains able to run through. The interchange yard was yet to be started. With an eye towards the future, in the second half of the year I constructed the benchwork for the Second Peninsula, on which the plains west of Casper and the Wind River Canyon would reside. As it turned out, this became a large flat area to pile crap on for years. I never got to laying track here. In December, I made a concerted effort to complete the Northern Pacific Loop by Christmas. There was a lot to do. I made it at about 11:30 p.m. December 24th. The Casper paper's headlines on Christmas Day chronicled the great achievement. I still had to lay the Minneapolis and Laurel Yard tracks, but the main loop was in and functional. And that's the way it was, 2004.